Welcome into this edition of MPW Digital Extra presented by Rustic Revivals. I am Neil McCready. Did the show last year. I didn't have a sponsor. Ended up being one of the more popular shows each week in terms of downloads, views, podcast listens. So running it back again this year. This time presented to you by Rustic Revivals. Based out of Flowood, Mississippi, Rustic Revivals builds tables and other furniture by hand with locally sourced lumber. The husband and wife team of Josh and Ashley Pierce specialize in custom-ordered tables, beds, dressers, coffee tables, bookshelves, decorative cabinets, chairs, and more. They have a limited selection of ready-to-pick-up pieces available in their shop as well. They deliver within 250 miles of Flowood there in the Jackson area. All pieces are sealed for protection. Podcast listeners and viewers here on MPW Digital can take 10% off their purchase by using the code REBELS10. That's all caps REBELS and then the number 10. There's also a QR code on the YouTube stream. You can also see it in the content item at rebelgrove.com. So go to rusticrevivalsms.com or facebook.com/rusticrevivalsms. Or you can go on Instagram at Rustic Revivals. You can also order directly by calling 228-217-1243 or email rusticrevivals@gmail.com. So on this show each and every week, we're going to take a look at Ole Miss's opponent each week. This week it's the Furman Paladins as Ole Miss gets started with a much-anticipated season. 6 o'clock on Saturday night there at Vaught-Hemingway. Ole Miss and Furman will have complete post-game coverage at MPW Digital and also at rebelgrove.com. So we'll talk about Furman this week. We'll talk about Ole Miss opponents throughout the week. We'll look at through the lens of people who cover those teams. We'll go around the SEC some. We'll go around the country some. Sometimes bring you some different guests as well. And then starting next week, Ben Mintz of Barstool Sports will join each week, and we'll look ahead to the NFL slate. NFL season gets started in 1 week when Kansas City, the defending Super Bowl champs, entertain the Baltimore Ravens. But no NFL on this show, just college football today. It's a show that I think you're really going to like. We've got 4 guests for you. I've got David Eckert, who covers Ole Miss for the Clarion Ledger. David does a terrific job covering Ole Miss for the Clarion Ledger, so we'll talk with him. Then we'll talk SEC and more with Braden Gall, who covers college football for ESPN, Athlon, and then his business, the Nashville-based 440 Sports. Then I'll be joined by Dan Scott, host of The Dan Scott Show, also the radio play-by-play voice of Furman football. He'll be in Vaught-Hemingway on Saturday, calling the Paladins opener. And then we'll take one more look at the Big Ten season ahead. Elliot Koff covers Iowa for Rivals.com. We'll talk about the Hawkeyes and all things Big Ten here on the show today. I'm telling you now that I'm coming to you from the Clark Ford Studios. Clark Ford is in Amory, Mississippi, 662-257-1900. Call that number. Ask for Corey Clark. Tell Corey what Ford product you're looking for. He'll send you a quote within 15 minutes in business hours. Right to the bottom line. There's no hassle. There's no haggle. You get your quote. And the rest is completely up to you. Shop it around. Do what I've done, what I recommend that you do, and that's hop into a Clark Ford today. All the guests that we just mentioned will join on the Campbell Clinic hotline. From fractures and sports injuries to complex spine and limb conditions, the pediatric orthopedic physicians at Campbell Clinic in Oxford are the only specialized pediatric orthopedic team in North Mississippi providing expert care for growing bodies. So visit campbellclinicoxford.com to schedule an appointment or call 901-759-3111. And we're brought to you all season by Wendy's. You've had Wendy's nugs dipped in sauce, but have you had them covered in sauce? Wendy's new saucy nugs take the crispy and spicy nugs you love and turn them up to 11. Choose between flavors like buffalo, honey barbecue, garlic parm, or if you're a real heat seeker, try spicy ghost pepper only on Wendy's signature spicy nugs. I dare you. There's 7 delicious ways to try the nugs you already love. So pick a flavor, grab some extra napkins, and prepare to nug like you've never nugged before. For a whole new way to nug, it's got to be Wendy's at participating U.S. Wendy's. So to the Campbell Clinic hotline we go, and we'll start out with David Eckert of the Clarion Ledger. Enjoy. David Eckert does a really good job, too good of a job, damn it, if we're totally honest, covering Ole Miss for the Clarion Ledger. Kind enough to spend some time with us here as we tape this a few days before you're seeing it. You're seeing this 2 days before Ole Miss's opener on Saturday night versus Furman. David, we have finally made it through a preseason. We have arrived at the finish line. Congratulations to both of us.
We made it. We subsisted on 5 team snaps per practice for a solid 4 weeks. I'm hungry for some actual football, so thank God.
How did your guess at depth charting go? Was that turned out to be a brutal exercise in futility, or do you think you're somewhat accurate?
There were a lot of oars on. I guess that's a nod toward the SEC adding rowing.
Yes,
but
for those that don't know, David for a young guy is quite a command on dad humor. So there you go. That was pretty good. Pretty good pun.
Yeah, off to a good start. But yeah, I mean, guess is the operative word. But the offensive line, no idea. Straight up, no clue. I think secondary and nickel corner, we're still guessing. Running back, it seems like everybody's kind of on equal footing there among the 3 that we expect to really get snaps. So those are the 3 problem areas, I guess. Other than that, I felt like I had a pretty good idea. Obviously, still don't really know what to do with Deion Smith at this point. Don't know what to do. Well, yeah, we don't have to go there, but don't know what to do with Xavier Harris either. We got to see how that situation shakes out. So definitely a lot of variables. But as far as guesses go, we'll just say no one has emailed me or called me to scream at me. So
that's probably a pretty decent sign. Well, they don't let us see much, and then we see that little period with the ones, or what looks like ones, in the first part of period 3, and I'm scribbling madly like numbers, and I look down and I'm like, I only have 10 numbers on defense. I'm missing somebody. Who am I missing? And then I always just guess and go probably Kari Coleman. So I fill it in like I think he was there. What are the strengths of this team? When you look at this team and the little bit that we see, but we get to talk to people, we do get a kind of a feel for how people feel about a team. Lane Kiffin clearly likes this team. I think is optimistic about this team. It's a guarded optimism. When you look at them just and putting a few things together, what are the strengths? What if I told you, if the football gods dropped in and said, yeah, this is a playoff team, how did this team get there?
I think they sacked the opposing quarterback upwards of 37, 38 times. You can tell based on the limited feedback from the scrimmages that we're getting from Lane that he really likes how the defensive line has performed. And I suspect, I don't have this confirmed, but just based on, I doubt Princely Umanmielen is participating in those at this point. So,
yeah, agreed.
You get to add him presumptively to a unit that's already, from the sounds of it, really commanding what we think is going to be a pretty good offense. So I think that seems like it's going to be a real strength. And then if we're kind of diverting from, obviously, the wide receivers, Juice Wells' health pending, Deion Smith's addition pending. Even without those guys, I think they're pretty dang good at wide receiver. But, and then, I guess kind of going away from the position by position thing, I just think the age, they don't really have a spot on the field where they're saying, hey, sophomore, go do a job for me here.
Yeah.
So it's to me, it's just you've combined talent with experience, and those two things are what win in college football. So
Yeah, I've told people they have a certain swagger that comes with, and when people hear that, I think they think bravado and confidence. I mean, and like cockiness, and I don't mean it like that. I just mean kind of a, and again, like I think it's imperative we say this. We don't see a lot. So when you read a lot of these reports, like, boy, there's really this comprehensive conclusions from things we saw in practice. You should absolutely take that with a grain of salt because we only see about 15 to 20 minutes, and it's the same 15 to 20 minutes every time. So you got
Same song too.
yeah,
Same
same
song.
song. Yeah, same song. I always
Dream
know that
Nightmare.
song. That song comes on. They're coming up the steps. Yeah, you. So you got to be super careful with that. But there is a maturity that's obvious. There's a confidence, I think, that's kind of a quiet confidence that I do think sort of shows with a lot of their guys. And like you said, it's an old team. It's by college standards, it's an old team. There's a lot of guys that have been at Ole Miss for 3 years, 4 years. A lot of guys who have been other places for multiple years. This is their last year. I don't think, and tell me whether you agree or disagree, I don't think this team's going to be overwhelmed by the hype, by the moment. Number 6 in the country to start the season, a lot of All-America talk, a lot of, Senior Bowl watch list talk where Lane Kiffin referred to it as, real rat poison and all that stuff. Yet he says all that, but I don't even think he really thinks that. I think this is a team that's not going to see the moment be too big. Not that it means it's going to win, but I don't think if they don't win, it will be because the hype was too much. Like you weren't around for this. In 2009, Ole Miss started 10th-ish, and it was pretty obvious that the hype was just completely overbearing for them. They suffocated them. I don't think that will be the case for this particular team.
Yeah, I get the same vibe. And look, the guys that have been here are guys that have succeeded already at the level that's going to be required for them to get to where they want to be, which is the college football playoff. So I think it helps in a lot of ways that they're not trying to do something new, except for the fact that the playoff is expanded. And I think a lot of that comes from Jackson Dart. Last time I was on, I think we talked about this. I really can't say enough about what he does for them emotionally, I think. And I think he kind of embodies what you're talking about because Jackson Dart knows that he's good. Like, Jackson Dart isn't up there going, oh, shucks, my teammate made... No, Jackson Dart knows. He's not obnoxious. He's just... He's got the exact right baseline of confidence with the knowledge that, okay, we've still got to go do a job here. And I think the team feeds off that. I really do. And I know that's cliche. And I know you and I think, kind of share a similar mind when it comes to this stuff. You hear that kind of thing and you roll your eyes. But with him, I buy it. I do.
Yeah, I do too. So, yeah. I mean, look at what he's been through. In 2022, he didn't finish the season particularly well. And Lane Kiffin went out and got Spencer Sanders, which was like, what the hell is this? And then I think Lane Kiffin got Spencer Sanders to do one of two things, either to win the job or to force Jackson to fix everything. And it turned out to be the latter. Jackson was like, no, I mean, I'm the guy. He never wavered. He's like, I'm the guy. I'm not worried about this. And he made dramatic improvements last season protecting the football, making plays. He showed an incredible amount of toughness. He got hurt in the Arkansas game. You would have kind of never really known it. He just kind of gutted through it. His teammates respect him. They want to play for him. I mean, I hate using the word love because, I mean, whatever, but they really have a lot of admiration for him, and they'll play hard for him, and it's his team. And after all that he's kind of been through with Kiffin playing mind games with him, I think he's even completely won Lane over. I mean, Lane, there's no game being played this time about who the quarterback is, who the leader of the offense is. I mean, it's very clearly Jackson Dart. Lane's doing the game thing with the backup quarterbacks now.
Yeah, which is kind of refreshing because, I mean, I last offseason, it was just so clear that it was always Jackson Dart, and we're like, okay. Yeah. I mean, we know what the outcome is here, but we still kind of have to play the game. So that was uncomfortable. So I'm grateful that he's freed us from that. But, yeah, I am curious to see – oh, geez, this hotel chair leaned back further than I thought. I always just hate it on the podcast. Um, I am kind of curious to see how this new dynamic for Jackson Dart feeds into the season, because he's never had this before. He's never been the guy. He's never had an off season to build and bond and act. Like this is his team. And he did help build this team. I mean, all of the transfers who came in talk about playing Xbox with him.
Yeah.
So his fingerprints are all over this team. That this is his group, and we'll see what that equates to. I think it's going to bring good things.
All right. So on the flip side, if the football gods came down and said this playoff thing doesn't happen, it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. That's all I'm going to tell you. It didn't happen. So they lost at least 3 games. Where would you point to immediately as that was the culprit?
I think I am concerned that the offensive line upgrades are not going to be what they're expected to be at this point. I don't know. Again, that feedback that we're hearing that basically the defensive line is winning most of the snaps on during these scrimmages. It's quite clear that they don't know who their best 5 is even now. And I think there were some guys who came in who, on paper you probably expected to assert themselves, and that doesn't really seem like it's happened. At least from what we've seen, they could be showing totally different stuff when we're not there. I don't know. But
I've heard similar stuff privately that there's concern about different guys. Have they come along? The one caveat with that, and it kind of applies to the whole team, that's, I guess, a benefit to them, David, is that they don't really play a game until late September. I mean, right? If Ole Miss were to lose to Furman or Middle Tennessee or Wake Forest or Georgia Southern, I mean, this turned out to be a complete waste of our time in August, right? I mean, we completely screwed it up. We missed it all, and they clearly misevaluated, and this was a disaster. So that's not going to happen. They're going to win those 4 games. How impressively, we'll see. What do they look like? We'll see. But they're going to win those games. It's going to give them time to figure out some things. But I agree with you. I mean, this is like this thing where you're like playing with this guy here and this guy here, and this guy's not exactly what you thought he would be. And that does seem to be, especially on a week where like Caleb Warren's hurt and Jerquan Scott's hurt. But okay, I think I've heard Scott's okay. There's no damage. He's just got to get through the pain. I'm not sure the same is exactly true on Caleb Warren as we record this. But they have some time to figure it out. But I do think as of the end of August, this is something they're still kind of working on, as opposed to like the defensive line where I think they know, hey, we can send some dudes out there and dominate.
Yeah, 100%. So, look, they still have to go play SEC road games, right? So, can you go beat Florida with Jackson Dart running for his life the whole time? I don't know. South Carolina, look, these are games, and you and I have talked about this privately. Like, there are the lesser SEC road games on this schedule are certainly games that they can still lose. I'm not predicting them to lose them,
sure,
but it's silly to act like, win in Gainesville, no biggie. Like, that's crazy,
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, they haven't won in Fayetteville since 2008. They haven't. I know they beat them in Little Rock one time, but still, they haven't won at LSU since 2008. LSU is going to be a top 15 team, maybe a top 10 team. That's going to be a very difficult game. The Arkansas game is sandwiched between Oklahoma and Georgia. There's the Florida game is late in the season where the Kiffin stuff could really be percolating. It could be a real distraction. I don't know about South Carolina. That's a weird place to play. I've watched teams go to South Carolina that were better than South Carolina and lose there because it gets really loud and it gets different, and you have to function. You have to kind of persevere through it a little bit. I think this team will be able to handle all of those things, but It's like when people say, well, it doesn't mean anything that Ole Miss hasn't won in Baton Rouge or Fayetteville or whatever since 2008. You're like, you're right. It really doesn't mean anything. And at the same time, it's something.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's college football. And even when you are better on paper, and even significantly better on paper than a lot of these teams, the worst team wins sometimes. That's how this works, right? And when you are at the top of the food chain, as we kind of anticipate Ole Miss to be, sometimes you go in and you get surprised, and that's what happens. So, to me, the weak spot in their armor, where one of those games could potentially cause them problems, is okay. The offensive line maybe isn't as good as we thought. That kind of throws the offense off. The other component to that is, have they effectively replaced Quinshon Judkins?
Yeah.
They've kind of tried to do that in the aggregate, I think, with bringing in a bunch of guys. But if you get halfway through the season and you discover that you haven't done that, and you discover that, okay, your offensive line isn't as commanding as you hoped it would be, now all of a sudden, you have all of these outside weapons, but you're a little bit one-dimensional. So, to me, they need either the offensive line or the running back situation to break right for them on offense. And I think I'm not certain about either of those right now. And that's not to say that I think they're going to go wrong, but right. I just have questions.
Yeah, I'm kind of eager to see what the first 4th and 1.5 around midfield, where Kiffin says, the card says go for it. And in the past 2 years, that you either gave it to Judkins or defenses had to really think about Quinshon being back there, right? And now he's not back there. And you probably don't want to run Dart a ton of times, because if Dart goes down, then your championship hopes probably go down with him. And so you have to be careful there. I'm curious, like, you're up 3 middle of the third quarter against Kentucky, and you have it 4th and 1 at your own 48, and you decide to go for it. Can you get it? Can the offensive line make a push against a good SEC defensive line? Do you have the back that can get those 2 yards in that moment? Because the last 2 years, and you and I have talked about this privately, and I've talked about it on the show a couple times, 2 things can be true at once, right? Quinshon Judkins was a pain in the ass, yet he was a pain in the ass for the other team too. I mean, so yeah. You can do the right thing by going, enough with the distraction, it's time for you to go. And it can also be a vacuum that you have to fill.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you still need a pretty good running back to win a national championship. You know what I mean? You're not going to do that with somebody back there who's just plain not effective. I did a story on this. I don't want to pull it up on the air, but I looked through because the new wave in the NFL right now is you don't need a good running back to win. You just it doesn't matter. You don't pay your running backs. And I kind of looked at the playoff data to see if that was corroborated by college running backs. Do you need a good college running back to win? And you do. You still do. So they need that trio, all of whom seem to do different things to be effective as a group, or they need Ulysses Bentley to prove that he can be efficient on a higher carry total, which is it's different than being efficient as a backup, which he's done, or you need one of those transfers to come up and say they're the guy. So they've got a lot of chances at it, which is good for them.
Yeah,
we still need to see, does this work?
Do you worry at all about linebacker after what we've seen in preseason?
On defense, that's the question mark for me. I just think there's a lack of depth there too. Like, they're an injury or two there away from being big time retro. So
yeah, I think so too. Like, they don't seem super confident in a lot of different guys. Like, I think they really like Daugherty. I think they know that they can count on Coleman, though I don't think Coleman's like this. elite playmaker, but he's very solid. He's a guy you can win with. They won 11 games with him last year. But yeah, after that, I think it's some question marks. I think there's things about Paul's game that they like. I think there's things about Paul's game that they obviously don't like because he's not running with the ones when we see them.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know how that's going to shake out. I don't. I think Daugherty and Coleman, if that ends up being the duo, is fine.
Yeah.
I don't think it's elite. But my questions start, like I said, what if somebody gets hurt? I mean, they just added this kid from UTSA. I think that they're kind of showing you that they kind of had that concern through their actions there, right? So I don't know. I think if everything goes to plan there, it'll be okay. But they have safety nets in pretty much every other spot on the field on defense, and they don't really seem to have one there.
All right, last thing, and I really appreciate your time. By the time people see this, it's Thursday night. What's your final preseason prediction for what you sort of think this team does? If no one, luckily, is going to come put a gun to our head, which is a good thing. I don't want a gun to my head over a college football team or anything for that matter. But if you were sort of forced to kind of put your money in on where this team ended, where would you go? And if I told you, we'll start there, and then I'll ask the follow up. What would your just gut feeling pick be?
9-3. I've been waffling between 9-3 and 10-2. I think with the schedule that they're playing, 9-3 could still very well get you in. But yeah, I'm going to go 9-3. I think they lose to Georgia. I think they lose to LSU, and I think they drop one of the other three SEC road games.
If I told you were off a game, if the football gods came down and said, "Nope, David, it's not 9-3, you're off a game one way or the other," would you go 10-2 or 8-4?
I'd go 10-2. I think.
Okay.
Yeah. I think
in the same boat. I think I'm picking 10-2, and if you told me I'm off a game, I go 9-3.
Yeah.
So
I'm at 9.5, really.
Vegas has the number at 9.5, and I'm like, you people are geniuses. I mean, you nailed it. I mean, that's exactly where it should be. I think. I mean, because I think if you put it at 8.5, I'd be pretty comfortable going over, and if you put it at 10.5, I'd go, I'll go under. That's easy.
Yeah.
But 9.5, it's like, you nailed it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I don't know. I just think expecting them to win every game that they should is, you have to be a really, really, truly elite top of the line college football team to do that. And I think
what Kiffin's kind of done though, and that's the reason that I think 10-2 is truly on the table, because the guy, in not counting the COVID year, and frankly even counting the COVID year, he's only lost kind of that one game, Mississippi State at home 2022, that you look at and go,
yep,
that was an inexcusable loss, really. Everything else kind of made sense, But I also go back to last year and think how close that season could have been to 8-4 or something like that.
Yep. Auburn, Arkansas. I mean, Tulane, right?
Tulane,
what
LSU.
if my Pratt plays? Yeah. I still have one guy. I picked them to lose to Tulane, by the way, last year. And there's one guy who is still in my email ragging on me about that. It's time to get over.
I mean, that game was scary as hell in the fourth quarter. I mean, Caden Davis hits, a 57-yarder or 56-yarder or something, or otherwise Tulane gets the ball and a chance to do something. I mean, people are crazy, man.
I want freedom from that guy, But yeah, look, I think they're really good. I think 9-3, you're still pretty firmly in the playoff conversation. Whether or not you're right on the right side of the bubble probably depends on how good the teams you beat end up being. Like, is Oklahoma any good? Does South Carolina have a decent season? If you beat Florida, what's Florida look like? So, but yeah, that's where I'm landing. We'll see.
Well, man, I really appreciate the time. Great work on the contract stories on Beard and Kiffin and all that. That was really excellent journalism. I know know how many people really appreciate how good the journalism was on that. The FOIA must have been an incredibly written FOIA, and I mean that sincerely. It was really, really strong.
I appreciate it.
Strong journalism. So, hey, thanks for the time. Hope we do this again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Always happy to do it.
We're joined by my friend Braden Gell. He is with Athlon, ESPN. He's got his own Nashville-based company, 440 Sports. Lots of different ways to consume his content, his opinions on the SEC season, which has finally arrived after what feels like I know it hasn't been years of preview. It has felt like years of just previewing the same things over and over. But alas, we are here. We have made it through the journey. It's like if you run a marathon, you just hit the little mile marker that goes 25, and you're like, oh my God, I did it. I did it. I just have to just one foot in front of the other for about 10 more minutes, and we're there. First of all, thanks for joining. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man, awesome. Always love talking to you. And you're right. It's been a long preview season, but it's also because we have so much new stuff to get to this year that I think it's even more chaotic. I think it's going to be even more interesting, and it's going to be one of the best football seasons, at least one of the most memorable football seasons that we've ever had in our lives. I mean, we didn't even know how the teams were going to be decided to play it in the championship game until like this week. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun.
We could even have a lottery. I mean, how cool would that be if we just have a lottery to see who gets to go to Atlanta? That would be the amount of the people who are not NBA fans. I'm an NBA fan. The people who are not NBA fans would get to have that NBA experience of it's rigged. You know, it's rigged. That envelope's cold. There's a tip off. There would be all of that. That would be amazing and fantastic at the same time. Although people would lose their mind.
I mean, we kind of already have that with the committee, with the rest of the country thinking that somehow the committee is like in the bag for ESPN and who's in the bag for the SEC, when that's like just illogical at its core. Like what ESPN wants, if you want to make the most money, is you want like Notre Dame, Ohio State, Alabama, and like USC or Texas in there. So like you do want some SEC, but you want as many regions of the country to be interested. So we already have like this conspiracy theorist sort of element to the committee. Can you imagine if we have to do a random drawing to decide who plays Texas in the SEC championship game? It's like Alabama or Ole Miss, and like it goes to Alabama. You don't think Ole Miss people are going to lose their minds about that? Like,
I mean, I'm such a jerk sometimes that when I read that email when it came out, I was like, oh, well, that could kind of happen. And that could kind of happen. And that could kind of happen. I was like, oh, God, that'd be awesome. Sign me up.
It's
the random.
It's very it's very unlikely, obviously, from a probability standpoint, that we actually get to like the sixth tiebreaker. Because like whatever this average margin of victory sort of like quotient, whatever. Either way, we have so much new. It's so exciting. I was at, I saw you at Media Days, and I think by the end of the week, it was like, I think the story here, because there wasn't a whole lot of news.
Yeah.
There never really is, but I think the real story is talking to good, smart football people, is that like people are genuinely interested and excited in the games on the field this year because it's so different and so new. And it also means it's almost impossible to predict. And there's so many good teams with good quarterbacks and good coaches in this conference that there's a whole list of combinations of teams making the playoff, making the SEC championship game, that if you told me happened, I wouldn't at all doubt it for 1 second.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, if we were doing the old format of 4 teams, I mean, I think there'd be this consensus, well, Georgia's in, Ohio State's in, so there's half the field. And that kind of takes some of the fun away right away. I mean, you're like, okay, well, all right, so what are we talking about? We're talking about 15 teams fighting for 2 spots? Okay. It's not nearly as exciting as, well, we're talking about 15, 16, 17 teams fighting for 10 spots. Because that's far more.
And I could make it like 35 teams fighting for 10 spots.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not hard. Iowa was preseason number 62 in our magazine at Athlon Sports, and they were 12-0 in the Big Ten championship game. I think this was 2015 playoff. And if Michigan State doesn't have like a 22-play drive where they beat Iowa in the Big Ten title game and they go on to play Alabama in the playoff in a not-so-competitive football game, the point being that Iowa was like 1 4th down conversion away from being 13-0, playing in the playoff with a preseason ranking outside of the top 50. And that's a 4-team playoff. And so I don't not to stay with Iowa here, Neil, but
yeah,
I mean, Iowa they're not even ranked in the preseason top 25. They could easily be 10-2 at the end of the year. That's 100%. What they do every year is go 10-2. So
the schedule's very favorable. All right, let me start there then. Because everybody always starts with the same handful of teams. We talk about Georgia, we talk about Alabama, Texas, Ole Miss this year. I am going to get your thoughts on Ole Miss. Obviously, it's predominantly an Ole Miss audience. But give me a couple of SEC teams that we're not talking about that there's a chance. I'm not saying this is definitely going to happen, but I always like to have the football gods drop in and visit. If the football gods dropped in and said, you know what, you guys, you talk a lot about SEC football. In late November, you're going to be talking about this team, fill in the blank, a lot more than you thought you were going to be talking about this team.
So I think there's two different tiers of this conversation. If you are asking me, like, truly and literally what team no one is talking about, because like even if I really like Florida to be better than people think, we've still spent all offseason talking about Billy Napier, but not really about them being good. I think Auburn's improved. Texas A&M is the one that I think is going to be the best of the group that is not in like the top 8, which again, you have to like caveat all these arguments. I think Texas A&M is going to beat Notre Dame in week 1. I don't know if they can go on the road and beat Florida. I don't know how fast things click for Texas A&M, offensive line, quarterback, etc. But they are loaded. I think Elko's the right guy. They've eliminated all the problems, and they are going to be extremely good by October and November. So the question is, how did they get there, right? Did they get there with 3 losses, or did they get there with like 1? And then they've got, I mean, they play everybody, so they could mess up a bunch of teams' schedules. I do think Florida and Auburn are slightly better than people think. I think Kentucky's better than people think. I think their schedule's too hard, so I'm not going to pick them. But A&M's the one that I would say, I mean, like, I think I've got them probably 8th or 9th in the conference, and I wouldn't be surprised that team is 10-2. I'm not going to pick it. If you're asking me to go up a tier and say which team are we not talking about that I think is a playoff team, but again, it's hard to say that because I think Tennessee, for example, is a preseason top 15 team. Like, we've spent a lot of time talking about Tennessee. But I think Tennessee is going to be very good. And it's about how quickly Nico, again, same thing with A&M, how quickly does it click, the light bulb for him? It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And so if they beat NC State in a tricky non-conference game that's better than people think, away from home in Charlotte, they go on the road and beat Oklahoma in the Sooners' first ever SEC game, where, you know, all the background and storylines with Josh Heupel and his alma mater, and like if Nico is good enough to be himself by that point of the season, which again Oklahoma's very early, I don't know, like, other than Georgia on the road, I don't know what game they definitively lose based on that stuff. So I think Tennessee could be extremely dangerous. But we've talked a lot. I mean, I don't know. Do you think we've talked a lot about Tennessee? Like, I think we've talked a lot about Tennessee. So well, I don't know. Maybe I'm.
You have. I don't think we have nearly enough, because there's 2 or 3 teams that I don't think we've talked enough about. I think we're underselling A&M, obviously, because I think over the last few years we oversold A&M. It's a natural thing. I don't blame fans for being this way. We hyped up A&M. They're going to win the national title. They spent all this money. And then they had all these distractions, and Jimbo ran an offense that kind of got archaic overnight a little bit, and he was stubborn about it, and he brought in Petrino, and then he said, hey, but Bobby, even though you run this offense that works, no, you're not running that offense. You're going to run my offense. I'll let you call the plays, but it's my offense, and then it doesn't work, and we go through the midseason thing. So A&M, everybody's a little burned on A&M, and on top of not liking them because of the cult stuff and all that, people get sick of A&M. But I do think they're better. I think Elko's a good coach. I think they're a talented team. I like the quarterback. I think there's a lot for them. We don't talk about Tennessee enough, just because they were just short a year ago, kind of, and they lost some people off that team. And we only saw Nico the one game, and it was a bowl game against Iowa, and no one really pays attention to those bowl games, and unless you cheer for one of those teams. And he was awfully good, but people sort of dismissed it. And then I think we're really not talking about Oklahoma enough. It's a game you just mentioned. It's one of the games I can't wait to watch. Is Tennessee at Oklahoma? Oklahoma's first SEC game. Nico, the Heupel stuff. Jackson Arnold will have a few snaps under his belt by that point. And if you talk to people that are around that program, they love Jackson Arnold, his physical abilities. That should be a fun game between two young quarterbacks that could end up having real ramifications down the road. And then, I don't know what it is. I think people are just completely dismissing Missouri because the uniform says Missouri. I know people pick them to make the playoff and stuff. Their schedule's favorable as hell. They have a very good quarterback. He's not great, but he's good. They have a dynamic receiver in Burton who is a game changer. You have to account for him on every play. They're really good up front on both sides of the ball. I think Drinkwitz has built kind of a steady organizational chemistry there. People get obsessed with him being a goob or whatever. Who cares, man? I mean, the guy's a good coach. His team's good. And so I think there's a bunch of good teams. Like you said, there's like 8 teams in the league that can legitimately convince themselves that, hey, we're a playoff team. And it's one of the things I'm so fascinated with, Braden, is that all 8 can't make it very clearly. No. And what happens to some of those teams when they get lost number 2? Do they look in the mirror and go, well, this shit's not happening. It's time for me to get ready for the draft. Hey, what about the portal? Why didn't this work? Because now we're in this thing. We've gone from a season where, a handful of teams are like trying to get to bowl games and, access bowls and stuff like that. Now it's, if you don't make the playoffs, it's kind of, I don't know, why are we doing this? And there's going to be teams midway through October that are basically out of the playoff race.
First of all, I agree with most of that. I would say 9, because I have Oklahoma at 9, and I agree with you. We haven't talked a lot about them. I think there's a lot of hurdles for them to clear, and it's not really it's not necessarily about like, hey, joining the SEC, step up in competition. It's not necessarily about that. They got a terrible draw from the league office from a schedule standpoint. It's brutal. It's like Florida's bad schedule or Kentucky's schedule. Those are probably 3 of the hardest schedules. It's hard to replace your star quarterback, even though they kind of sent Dylan Gabriel packing. It's hard to replace your offensive coordinator. It's hard to replace all 5 starters on the offensive line. It's hard to move to a new conference where they don't give you any schedule breaks. It's really hard to do that all at the same time. Yeah. And so that's sort of where I'm at with. I think Oklahoma could be 7-5 and be much better than their record indicates, right? Like they could be a 9-win good team, but because they have to play like at Ole Miss, Alabama, Auburn on the road, like they got to play all these brutal games. Missouri on the road, like they play everybody, Texas, and Alabama at home. So it's just
at Auburn.
They could lose brutal. Yeah, they could lose 4 times, and all 4 losses be to like top 10 teams. So I have not spoken as much about Oklahoma. I agree with you. I think for me that's because I don't think I like A&M better as like just straight up. I think A&M's got a better roster, a better team, better record. I think LSU is a team that like I am on the bottom half of LSU, meaning I think less of them than probably a lot of folks do. I still think they're a top 15 team and a playoff contender. The teams that I lean towards are Tennessee, Missouri to jump up into that top tier. I agree with you on Missouri, but and this is not. I'm not saying that this is what is happening, what will happen, or what could happen. But if you're asking me which team has the volatility of that sort of focus thing you're talking about, like midway through the season, all of a sudden you get a second loss. And like the focus starts to be a question, and like that whole how much does the culture and the process, like the team that, and again, this isn't fair, and I'm not saying it's going to happen, but the team that has the makeup for that to happen to them is Ole Miss.
Yeah,
and that's because it's so many new pieces that are expected to come together. I think Lane Kiffin is uniquely qualified to manage that type of dynamic in the locker room. I think you got a quarterback who is so respected that he is qualified to handle that dynamic in the locker room. But to your point, if you're looking at teams, which team sort of starts to trip or starts to doubt itself or face some adversity, normally the team that is sort of thrown together a little bit more short-term wise, especially with a coach like Lane who's a little bit more volatile in general, to me, that's the team that I would circle. I don't think that's going to happen. I want to be clear.
Yeah, but we're on the exact same page on this. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, I think like there's certain dynamics about the preseason, because I was talking to some of the Tennessee players, and at media days, and they were just like, so they did. And I think Josh Heupel didn't bring Nico to media days because they want to be the team that is picked 7th and quote unquote disrespected. It's not disrespect, but they don't want the spotlight yet. And I think they want to earn their way into it, and I think that's how he's keeping his young quarterback focused. I think that's how he's keeping, a defense that still has questions, frankly, especially in the back 7. So I think there's some like mental games being played by coaches this offseason to try to stay focused because there's so many different dynamics that we've never experienced. No divisions, 12-team playoff, 2 new teams, tougher schedules, crazy tiebreakers we already alluded to. Ole Miss, Missouri, and Tennessee could be 10-2 and tied for second place in the conference and have never played each other this year. And then it's going to go to like common opponents, and they all play Arkansas, okay, W for all 3. They all play Mississippi State, W for all 3. And they all play Oklahoma, and Ole Miss and Missouri get Oklahoma at home. Tennessee has to go to Oklahoma. Point is, this is all new stuff, and a coach has to figure out how to manage it. And I do think Lane can do it, and I do think Ole Miss's schedule and et cetera, they're going to be good. But which team has the psychological makeup to maybe fall into that trap? I would put Ole Miss at the top of the list.
I completely agree. Like Ole Miss is going to go 4-0 to start the season, period. And we're not going to know a whole lot about them. Now, they get a Kentucky team at home after that I think's good. I think Ole Miss will beat Kentucky, don't get me wrong. But I've had people tell me, I've had people say, hey, do you think Ole Miss can go 12-0? And I'm like, probably not. What about 11-1? Sure. All right, I can get them to 11-1. No problem. No problem at all. Because I'm with you. I think LSU is going to be good, but I think that's a winnable game for Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss would be favored against Oklahoma at home. Their other road games, they go to South Carolina. I think Ole Miss is better than South Carolina. They go to Arkansas. Ole Miss is better than Arkansas. They go to Florida. By the time Ole Miss gets to Florida, that could be chaos there. They could be a better team in total chaos because their schedule's brutal. And then, so we're not talking about a whole bunch of deals here, but if someone said, paint me a scenario where the Ole Miss season goes to hell, okay, I can do it. You stumble at home against Kentucky.
Well, and
you go to LSU and lose, and you go into an open date in the middle of October, and you already have 2 losses, and Georgia's looming on your schedule, and you have all these people that really haven't been there very long that have been doing this last dance thing that if I were an Ole Miss fan, it would creep me out. It would bother me, the whole last dance thing, because the last dance for the Bulls was championship or bust. It wasn't, hey, let's make the Eastern Conference semifinals. No, it was win the whole damn thing, or this is a failure. Oh, and after this season, everyone is leaving, including the coach. And so here's the scenario with Ole Miss is you get a couple of losses and you're still in it. Maybe you just lose to LSU. And then all of a sudden the Florida rumors start coming. I'm not saying there's validity to them. I don't know. I'm just telling you the rumors are coming, right? If Napier is going to be out.
Oh, for sure.
The name on the top of everyone's list because it will leak and it will be clickbait and all that stuff is going to be Lane Kiffin. That's going to be floating for week after week after week.
Thanks,
after week.
Thanks, Jimmy Sexton.
Yeah, it's going to become a distraction, and it's all there. The recipe for a disaster. Yeah. All the ingredients are kind of. I'm with you. I think they're better than that. I think they're too good on both lines of scrimmage. I think you have a third-year quarterback with a third-year OC and a head coach. They've all been together for a long time. I think they're going to be fine. But when people go, is there volatility there? I'm like, well, yeah, the potential for volatility, absolutely.
It's funny you mentioned Last Dance. Like the other thing that they had so much continuity leading up to that one and proof of concept, which right now Ole Miss does not have necessarily with this group of players. Lane Kiffin has it because he's won so many games. Here's the thing. I think the top 2 candidates for the Florida job would be Eli Drinkowitz and Lane Kiffin. I think those would be the 2 names that would get floated. And what's so ironic about that is that Missouri and Ole Miss are almost identical twins this season. Yeah, their schedules both set up very well in the first year of the SEC. They're both coming off 10-win seasons last year. They both have elite quarterbacks. They both have guys on. They both have an elite number 1 wide receiver that's going to play on Sundays. Like the real difference between the two is Ole Miss is probably deeper and more talented on the front 7, but other than that, like they are largely carbon copies of each other with sort of like these kind of goofy coaches who are like kind of brilliant at the same time. and really know how to talk to their players and build culture. I've really struggled and gone back and forth with them because I do think Ole Miss has the slightly better roster. I think Missouri's almost got like an easier schedule. I do think Florida's going to get either LSU or Ole Miss at home at the end of the year. They get both of those teams at home at the end of the year, and I think they get one of them because I think Florida's better than people think. And I even if it's like a 7-win season, much like Oklahoma, I think Florida is better than their record's going to indicate because of how brutal they play 8 top 20 teams on their schedule right now. That is absurd. And so I think I agree with the conversation and that I think Ole Miss is going to be better than that. But going all the way back to sort of a point you made, which is like you can't have 9 playoff contenders and all of them get in. I personally think Georgia and Alabama and Texas are probably on the top tier. Maybe it's just Georgia. I think those 3 are sort of separate. And then I think it's like Ole Miss, Missouri, Tennessee. Those would be my 3, probably battling for one spot. And truly, the 3 of them could be tied, and the committee is going to have to decide which one gets in. And that's total chaos from like a content standpoint. We're all going to be like, how did the committee decide? Tennessee actually would have, I think, this is why I go to Tennessee on this. They're the ones with the non-conference strength of schedule out of those 3 teams. They got to play at Georgia. Ole Miss plays at home. Missouri doesn't. Tennessee's going to have played Alabama as well. Now the other teams are, there's not a huge like Tennessee's schedule at Oklahoma. Okay, Ole Miss gets them at home. The point is you can do the mental exercise where the committee looks at those 3 teams and goes, well, Tennessee has the best resume. And all 3 of them could be tied at the end of the year.
Tennessee has that stretch where they go Florida at home, Alabama at home, open date, Kentucky at home. What a weird schedule. Mississippi State
it is.
At Georgia. Then they finish with UTEP and Vanderbilt. So that Georgia game would be this like lasting, lingering note, right, from the last glass of wine that they had that evening. Yeah, and then like we talk about Ole Miss's schedule a lot. Missouri's is the problem for Missouri is that
they don't have the resume wins.
They go to A&M, and that could end up being a resume win. If you and I are both right about A&M, I agree. Really sexy win. They get Auburn at home. If you're a Missouri fan, you really need Auburn to be good. They go to Alabama, so you could survive that loss. You got to beat Oklahoma at home. And then their finish is at South Carolina, at Mississippi State, Arkansas at home. So it's a potential that you're playing 3 of the 4 or 5 worst teams in the league to finish the season. So those wins the committee would be like, whatever, you didn't play anyone. And then,
I mean, on paper, strength of schedule goes in order: Tennessee, Ole Miss, Missouri, with those 3.
Yeah.
If you have to rank them,
Ole Miss's finish after Georgia at home, and if we're just assuming that Georgia runs roughshod through the league, Ole Miss would have an opportunity if you're right, and Florida's better than everyone thinks. They would have that November 23rd game at Florida, where that could be
a good win.
Could be a good win that the committee goes, see, they bounced back from Georgia.
I mean,
finish at home with State.
Again, NC State is a top 25 team, so
yeah,
a top 25 non-conference win away from home, I assume will be viewed favorably by the committee. Again, we're getting into what ifs here. The point is that all 3 of those teams could be. I think all 3 have very good quarterbacks who fit very well into their systems, and they're going to be highly productive players this year, and they're going to be really fun teams to watch. The questions are sort of in the secondary for all 3 of them. The coaches all have run really good offenses, and the schedules are sort of manageable for all 3. I think Tennessee's schedule would be considered more difficult, just slightly, if the committee has to split hairs. None of them will play each other, and there's a chance that if Notre Dame is good and they got a playoff spot, I don't know if they're good enough there. If there's a 4th Big Ten team, is there a second team from the ACC or the Big 12? You have to look around the rest of college football and go, well, is the SEC going to get 3, 4, or 5? I think 4 is all but locked in with how good the top of this league is. The question is can they get a 5th? And I think some of that's dependent on Notre Dame, Penn State, Michigan, the ACC, and the Big 12, who sort of like is somebody surprise us and step into that spot. And I think that's where there's a chance somebody gets left out that's totally deserving. Like if Tennessee's 10-2 or Ole Miss is 10-2, and Iowa gets in because they're 10-2, to me, Ole Miss is better than them. Like especially if they both finish 10-2, It'll be interesting to see what the committee does, and we have no clue. So,
you know what's funny is I
catch
myself laughing at this because you know how fans are each Saturday when the season rolls around. They want their team to win by 100, and they want every other SEC team to just be humiliated. That makes them happy, and it's like you have to completely retrain your brain. If you're a Tennessee fan, an Ole Miss fan, a Missouri fan, hell, an Alabama fan this year, you don't need the league to lose games. Like you need Texas A&M to beat Notre Dame. You're kind of cheering for Arkansas to beat Oklahoma State in week 2 to like almost like just deliver this this cancerous dagger to Oklahoma State right away, like where the Big 12 is going to get one team. And you need the ACC to be an absolute train wreck, except for like one team. And so you need Tennessee to beat NC State. In other words, you need those kind of things to happen so that there's a scenario where 5 get in. And I think there is a scenario where 5 get in. And everyone tells me I'm an idiot.
I agree. No, I agree.
So we're idiots together then. I just think you can't convince me that the SEC, with all of its muscle, they always flex it, that when the push comes to shove, that they're really going to find a way to let a 10-2 SEC team like a Missouri or an Ole Miss or a Tennessee get left out in the wind. I just don't believe it.
The more likely scenario is that like each or some of those teams lose a third game because college football is crazy and hard. That's the more likely scenario, is that Tennessee loses a third game somewhere and solves the problem for the committee, or Missouri slips up because Missouri's strength of schedule, they might need to be 11-1. But again, I don't see how the committee leaves out. We say all this all the time every year, and then there's more losses than we expect, right? Because it's just college football's great, and you're going to lose games you're not supposed to. It's the way the sport works. And what's interesting is your training your brain thing is fascinating to me, because I thought I've been training SEC fans to stop chanting SEC at other teams in the league. And I think we've actually done the job. I think we've when I got started in this business in 2005, like some of my Big Ten friends and Big Ten coworkers were always just like, why are South Carolina and Kentucky fans chanting SEC when Florida wins a championship? And I go, I don't know. I don't know. I don't understand. You're rooting against your own best interest, because if Florida wins a championship, then it's harder to recruit against them, and they get all the cut. I don't understand. And so I actually think in the last 10 years, we've sort of trained the SEC chant out of people. But now you're sort of like looking at your schedule going like, all right, I need these 10 teams to keep winning.
Well, you can cheer against the league at the end in the playoffs. Like that's when you can go, hey, I hope Liberty smokes, Tennessee or whatnot. But no, in the regular season, you don't need I'm looking at this the Ole Miss schedule at the end. You don't want Florida to be 4-6. You don't want Arkansas to be 2 and whatever when you go there, and then you end up only winning by a touchdown, right? And because they played well for 2.5 quarters, and your team's completely dialed out on a game that's between Oklahoma and Georgia, and you slog through it, which happens every single season in college football, like since the beginning of time. There's a team that just shows up for a game that they should win by 40, and they barely win by 6. And it happens. Yep. It will happen 30 times this season coming up. And it's one of the reasons that all the people who cover the sport, and this kind of drives me insane at the end of every Saturday when they go, see, greatest sport ever. Well, the reason it's the greatest sport ever is because it's so unpredictable. And so you're going to have those goofy things that happen, and the committee's going to cling to some of that stuff. Like, oh, well, Ole Miss only beat Arkansas by a field goal. And it's
let me push back on that.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
So I think you're right with fans, message boards, Twitter, radio shows, interactions. I think that's absolutely right. When you get into an argument with your buddy at the bar, and you're like, well, look at them. They only beat South Florida by 1 score, and Jalen Milroe couldn't even play against South Florida. Like as fans and as media, sometimes we rely on the thing that's the worst. I actually don't think the committee does that.
Okay.
I think they might use it as maybe a tiebreaker if literally everything is considered equal. I think they could use that as a tiebreaker. But I think most people in that room understand the game. They have all the analytics, and they have to look at the entire body of work. And if you have to bake in, and again, this is what makes teams that are dominant from start to finish so impressive to me. Even if you have a bad strength of schedule, like if Ole Miss, let's say their strength of schedule is like in the 50s or something, and it's the worst strength of schedule of any of the playoff contenders. But if they are 11-1, their losses to Georgia, and they win by 21 points over everybody else. Like, being dominant to me has always mattered in college football. It's not that you ran up the score. It's that, like, 2013 Florida State played a terrible schedule, but they won by 42 points a game, and I'm not even making that number up. That's how much they won by. If you are beating people by 6 touchdowns on Saturdays consistently the entire season, and you don't really ever slip up, you're awesome. Like, everybody struggles. Every team has a moment where maybe they're not as focused mentally, or a quarterback, the ball doesn't bounce like a basketball. It bounces all funny. So I like luck, referees, turnovers, bad day under center. Like, there's just a million things that can go wrong. And that's why I'm so impressed by teams that are like overly dominant. And Georgia last year is a good example. That wasn't one of the toughest SEC schedules in the playoff era for a dominant SEC team. But like, name me the game that Georgia was like in the regular season that you were like, man, is it the Auburn game? Like, where they're on the road and then Carson Beck throws like 3 touchdowns in a row and they win fairly easily?
Really, the only one was Missouri a little bit. Missouri kind of was with them, but even watching that game, you're like, Missouri's not winning.
And what was the final score? Like, didn't it like
it was like 10
I don't know, like
it was like
okay,
Missouri was good last year, right? I mean, Missouri
they were awesome.
They were 11-2 last year, and they won the Cotton Bowl or whatnot. I mean, I just, for whatever reason, people sleep on them. I think because the name says Missouri. I think if that exact same team,
I think they're good. Yeah, if
that exact same team existed and wore Tennessee uniforms, I think people would talk about them differently. I really do.
I agree with you on Missouri. That and if that's me disrespecting their performance last year, I apologize. But to your point, did anybody ever expect them to actually win that game in Athens? Like, no, we didn't. And that's ultimately the point. Like, being consistent, and this is what made Nick Saban the greatest of all time. Like, the ability to remove the human element from performance is what makes the greatest coaches the best coaches. Because the human element is what gets us all into trouble every day of our lives. It's human mistakes. It's human slip-ups. It's lack of focus. It's not on every single rep. Nick Saban got his players to remove that human element and just maximize their performance on every rep, no matter what they were doing. And that is truly what makes like a college football team. I don't think 12-0 is like, I'm not even sure 12-0 is like that attainable anymore because of how balanced the sport is going to get. And I just think it's going to be like, I think Georgia could lose 2 games this year and clearly be the best team in college football. That's how difficult their schedule is. So I think it's to your, going back to retraining our brains. I do think, and Brian Kelly, I think there's a reason Brian Kelly has said 10 wins is our goal every year at LSU. And he's won 10 games each time. And I think 10 wins at LSU gets you into the playoff. And I think recalibrating our brains for 10 wins, regular season 10 wins, that puts you into the playoff. That puts you into the conversation in the SEC championship game. And that should be deemed a success for almost every program, even the best. What you do in the playoff matters and is a different story for teams like Alabama and Ohio State and teams that expect championships, Georgia. But I think for the vast majority of college football, 90%, it is, can we get to 10 wins and get into the playoff? That would be deemed a huge success. I think that's the case for Ole Miss, for Missouri, for Tennessee, for Oklahoma, for Texas A&M, for Florida, for Auburn, for LSU, for Missouri. Every one of those teams is how they're looking at it. Texas and Georgia and Alabama, do they want to look at the national title? Sure, that's okay. But I think the other teams are like, all right, we want to get in and we want to win a game and maybe play a competitive second game. And I think that should be the way we evaluate a lot of these
things.
What
happens. Yeah, get like my friend Dan Jennings used to say, referring to the baseball tournament, baseball playoffs, was make the tournament, see what happens. All right, last thing. Yep. We don't talk about Georgia a whole lot because I think we just assume this dominance. I keep hearing from people around that program that there's this quiet confidence that this is the best team he's ever had, that losing the SEC title game last year has them completely dialed in. I mean, they've had all the speeding things and the arrests and all that. I mean, they appear to be completely locked in. Is Georgia the prohibitive favorite to win the whole thing?
National championship, yes. I think what's ironic is I think I can predict the playoff and the national championship game more than even the SEC championship game with the new format. Because I think over the more games you add, the better the team has to be to find success, right? And so I think Georgia and Ohio State are the two best rosters with they're the two best situations in college football. And honestly, if you're comparing the two, There's certainly some things where Ohio State's better, like receivers and skill playmakers. They're probably better than Georgia. But at the most important places, offensive line, quarterback, head coach, Georgia's better at all three. And so I lean Georgia over Ohio State. I know some folks like Ohio State, but if you told me who is the lock to make the playoff, I only have two teams in that conversation. It's Georgia and Ohio State. Everybody else could lose a third game, and the third game could knock them out. I think Georgia, the questions about Georgia are more about, in those critical situations, do you have on 3rd and 7 a replacement for Brock Bowers or Ladd McConkey? Do you have a safety valve when someone brings pressure on 3rd and 6 and Carson Beck doesn't have his two most dependable weapons to throw to? And so I think that's a question. And then I think stopping the run on defense, again, all relative to Georgia standards here. They're still a top 15, top 20 defense in all of America. Are they like they were 2 or 3 years ago where they just suffocated people and bludgeoned people and you could not do anything? That, like, where are they? Are they kind of like last year where it's clear that they missed, Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter? Like, is it clear that they missed 700 pounds of guy? Like, I would ask this about Texas, by the way. Byron Murphy, Tavondre Sweat, not there. 700 pounds of dude stopping the run. That's a big loss.
Yeah.
And so I think with Georgia, I think it's safety. Like, it's more on Carson Beck to be more of a owner of the offensive production this year, which I think he's capable of. And then are they elite at stopping the run, or are they just really, really good? And at that point, if both of the answers to those questions are we're not sure, then they could lose in any game in the playoff, or they could lose to a couple of different teams on their schedule in the regular season. If the answer of even just one of those questions is definitively yes, like yes, Carson Beck can handle this, or yes, the defense is elite, I don't know how they're not in the Final Four, at least, if not the championship game, because they are motivated. Kirby is motivated. They're the most talented team in America. It's a cop-out answer, Neil, but I think Georgia's number one. So
I do too. Hey, listen, I've kept you longer than I said I would. I really appreciate you. Please tell my listeners, the viewers, how they can catch more of your work.
Yeah, so SEC Football Live every Wednesday at 3 o'clock on our YouTube page. That's 440 Sports. You can check us out. It's a Nashville-based company covering mostly Nashville sports, but we got to do some SEC football. I'm going to have a co-host on that show with me that most Ole Miss fans will recognize, maybe hate, but maybe love, but maybe hate love. I don't know. You'll tune in at 3 o'clock on Wednesdays. We talk SEC football every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock. We do appreciate you. Get the podcast later on everywhere podcasts are found. And then you can catch me on ESPN Radio, and you can catch me with Athlon Sports as well. So lots of college football stuff this time of year. I'm ready for it, man. I'm genuinely excited about Florida State and Georgia Tech, Yeah,
so. I am too. It's going to be a fun game. And like you said, when there's only 2 teams that everyone will put in the tournament right off the bat, that means there's 10 spots. And it's never been like that. I've always longed for this. I wish they'd gone to 16 teams, but 12 is a good number too. And I think it completely rejuvenates a sport that frankly didn't need to be rejuvenated. It was already pretty juvenated. Now it's been even more rejuvenated. So I think that's great. It's going to be a lot of fun, and appreciate your time very much.
Yeah, that's what I strive for every day. Juvenation. I just want to be juvenated. That's what I want.
Me too.
Yeah, always a pleasure, man.
Let's juvenate. All right. Thanks, man. Appreciate you. Dan Scott is the voice of Furman football. Furman and Ole Miss, 6:30 on Saturday night in Vaught-Hemingway. We have finally made it to the football season after 8 million years of seemingly previewing this season. It's finally here. We get to talk about actual games. Dan, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Hey, Neil, it's great to be with you. It does seem like it has been forever since the last football season, and the only other thing that I can think of is everybody else is getting paid a lot of money except us.
We're working on it, but yeah, not making Lane Kiffin money here. That's for sure. That would be nice. All right, so games like this one for Furman, because Furman goes into this season as it was a year ago, very much a contender in FCS. They made a deep playoff run. I think lost to Montana in overtime late last season. So this is a Furman team that has a winning pedigree that wants to be playing into December just like Ole Miss does. Obviously, this is a different kind of game. Ole Miss 6th in the Associated Press poll. Just from your perspective, what does beyond the obvious of, look, you go play to win the game and all that, but what does a program like Furman try to get out of a game like this one against a top 10 SEC team?
Well, I mean, first of all, we addressed the elephant in the room, the paycheck. For FCS schools, playing a game like this is necessary because of the payday that you get and what it does to help the bottom line for money in the athletic department. So, but Clay Hendricks has been through this many, many times as a player and a coach at Furman. He is 31 years associated with this school, and there is a pedigree of Furman not only being competitive in games like this, in fact, winning games like this. That's how Dick Sheridan ended up at North Carolina State all those years ago. He beat NC State twice as Furman's head coach in back-to-back years. And just since I've been here, we have one win over an FBS opponent, and that was Central Florida back in 2016. But we have gone into Michigan State, been in a one-score game in the fourth quarter there. Last year, even at South Carolina, it was a couple of bogus calls at the end of the first half that allowed them to get a two-score lead going in to halftime. Even 3 years ago, Clemson had to keep its starters in the fourth quarter, although they had, I think it was a either 2 or 3 score lead, but they kept their starters in to keep Furman from scoring in a goal line situation about midway through the fourth quarter. So understanding the challenge, knowing what you're going into and the reality of it, the mindset's going to be they're going to go play as hard as they can, try to win the game, and just try to get better for the games that actually matter for us on our schedule beginning the next week.
I know you've started to probably dive pretty deep into the into your preseason prep, learning the roster and that kind of thing, talking to coaches, that kind of thing. Give me a just early preseason scouting expectation for what you expect from Furman in terms of, offense, defense, where this team's going to have strengths, where it might have some vulnerabilities.
If we block offensively, we're going to be a pretty good team. This is a collection of skill players, especially in the wide receiver room, that may be more talented as a group than any that I've been here. The running backs, even though Dominic Roberto, who was fantastic for us, is gone, I think will be deeper. And if Grant Robinson stays healthy, he is a different kind of back because he's got the size of a Roberto, but he's got the shiftiness and speed of a smaller back. His question is always, can he stay healthy? So the two questions on offense are going to be losing 4 starters from a year ago. How well are the new guys going to perform, and how quickly is it going to take them to develop the kind of chemistry that it takes to perform well as an offensive line? And then, of course, quarterback, because the last 2 years we relied on Tyler Huff's legs when plays broke down, even more than his arm. He was a good passer. He was not a downfield threat. Well, the guys who are going to be behind center, most likely it'll be Carson Jones, the redshirt sophomore, who will get the nod. He is not nearly the runner that Tyler Huff is, but he and freshman are both excellent downfield passers. And that's going to be a dimension in this offense we haven't had if we can keep the quarterback upright. So I think that's the big thing, the young quarterbacks, and, of course, the offensive line. Defensively, the front 7 is stout. They're going to be good. They're going to be deep. Where we were hit with graduate losses was in the back end. A lot of really talented young players who are going to get their first chance to show what they can do. Unlike even schools at our level, unlike schools even in our conference, Neil, who go the transfer route now to build rosters, Clay Hendricks believes that he has to develop players. And while there is a transfer here and there on this team, you look at our roster, and I think of the scholarship players who will be taking the field this year, the vast majority of them are going to be freshmen and redshirt freshmen. because of how they have recruited and how he goes about developing players.
How much has he had to deal with losing guys in the portal, where obviously he's got one of the better, more consistent FCS programs in the country, which means that I'm assuming here Furman doesn't have as much NIL as ACC schools, SEC schools. So good Furman players are being recruited during the season. Let's just be honest. It's the way it works. How has Hendricks and Furman been able to sort of address that, handle it?
It's interesting because, we have lost a handful of players over the last 2 or 3 seasons who've gone on to do other things, but we have also had 3 or 4 different guys who have gone into the portal and then realized that aren't as promising on the other side as they thought. And Clay, I think with only one exception, has allowed those guys to come back, which not every coach would do. It's developing trust. It's developing the program. He is entering his 8th season now, and now that we're past all of the COVID stuff and the roster overload and all of that, it's starting to fall back into what he was doing pre-COVID, and that is developing guys, having to live in the current landscape. So guys wanting to transfer or guys being recruited, as you said, that's always going to be something when you land and develop a really dynamic player at the FCS level. But so far so good as far as retaining the ones that matter the most.
You're the radio voice of the Greenville Drive, Boston Red Sox High A affiliate. We obviously Furman football. You've got experience play-by-play with Clemson. I'm always fascinated with play-by-play guys because the game in front of you is happening really fast, especially a lot of these teams, Ole Miss included, do a lot of tempo stuff offensively. The game is moving quickly. Take me through your prep process for Saturday night. How do you sort of get ready for how you're going to call that game for your listeners back home?
Well, the good thing is what we see in the Southern Conference on a weekly basis is a good way to prepare for a game like this, because Ole Miss is going to go fast. We know that. They're not going to go faster than Sanford.
Yeah.
And it's what it does. It gives my color guy a lot less time to talk. and he's a lawyer, so he loves to talk. But you just learn to pick up the flow of things and find ways to drop in the little nuggets when you can. And what we have found out, at least at our level, we'll see how it plays out on Saturday night down there. But our defensive coordinator has a unique way to prepare for teams like that. When we go into Sanford week, they have 2 full offensive teams ready to go when they do live scrimmage. So the first team will run a play, and then the second team sprints out and runs a play. So in practice, they're actually running faster than the actual offense that they'll see on Saturday. And they've had a remarkable record of being able to slow down that Sanford offense. Now, we're talking different caliber athletes, bigger, faster, stronger. I get all that.
Yeah.
The preparation will be there from their standpoint. From my standpoint, it's just going to be trying to do what I always do, and that's just describe what's happening, just do it in a much quicker way.
Do you spend a lot of time memorizing rosters? I mean, who's number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 for Ole Miss, that kind of thing? And in this era, I'm curious, where you have so many teams, and Ole Miss has a ton of it, where there's 2 number 2s and 2 number 3s. And obviously you're not covering Ole Miss day in, day out, so you're not intimately familiar with the roster the way you are the Furman roster. How do you sort of decide which parts of your brain you allow to be committed to that?
Well, my wife will tell you that I don't have much brain power to spare, so I operate under the KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
The good thing is if a team has, say, 2 number 2s, one has to be on offense, one has to be on defense. So you can't, they're not going to be on the field at the same time. Dirty little secret for me personally, and I don't know how other guys do this, I don't try to memorize the entire roster of the other team. I spend most of my time on the skill players. and making sure I know who has the ball, where the ball is going, and those kind of things. And then we have depth charts. We have I have a spotter. I have all that information in front of me, and I do study it as the week goes on. But I'm not going to sit there and try to memorize 80 guys from the opposition when, as I have found out in doing team radio for the last 14 years, our people want to know something about Ole Miss, but they're more concerned about what our guys are doing.
100%.
So that's kind of the tack that I take. Try to keep it as simple as possible. Follow the football. Know who the skill guys are, and the depth in the skill guys on both sides of the ball, and then go from there.
I grew up in Ruston, Louisiana, back when Louisiana Tech was what they called then Division I AA team, FCS. I can remember just how exciting the town was when the playoffs rolled around. Is it that way with Furman? I mean, obviously they'd love to pull off an upset with Ole Miss and stuff like that, but when the playoff push comes, is it still are people still as engaged in it as they were back when I was a kid?
I think they're re-engaging. As much as Furman has that deep history at the 1AA or FCS level, in the 1988 national champions, they played in the championship game either 2 or 3 other times. When we hosted a game 2 seasons ago, a first-round playoff game, that's the first time we'd hosted since 2005. So, we had all of our playoff experience had been on the road for almost 2 decades. So they're re-engaging. Our current administration, athletic director, Jason Donnelly, our associate AD in charge of external ops, Drew Ingraham, they have done such a phenomenal job in re-engaging the Furman fan base, creating a regular season game day experience, and then hoping that's going to carry over into the playoffs. The interesting thing for us about the FCS playoffs is that, although it won't be the case this year because of the 12-game schedule at our level, usually that first round falls on Thanksgiving weekend, and the students are gone. So it presents some unique challenges. This year, it's a week beyond that. So hopefully, if we're hosting in either the first or second round, we won't have that issue to deal with. But the fan base, I think, is getting re-engaged, having had home playoff games each of the last 2 years for the first time since 2005.
Let me ask you this as I start to let you go, and I really appreciate your time, Dan. It's really fun to visit with you. You have some Clemson background.
Yes.
Clemson's been in the news a good bit the last couple of years. Probably not as vocally as Florida State, but it's the same rumblings are there in terms of the future of the ACC and where those programs want to go with the SEC and the Big Ten having the huge TV contracts. What's your just kind of personal opinion from being in that area and knowing people around the program? What's the next few years look like for Clemson?
Honestly, I think if Clemson could step foot outside of the ACC tomorrow, they would. That's the vibe that I get from people. I'm still friends with a lot of people over there. I'm friends with a lot of people who cover Clemson because I still live in the area. And I think if the door opened tomorrow, they would be out. They're going to have to jump through all these legal hoops. I honestly think that when everything is said and done, there's going to be a settlement of some kind. I don't think these lawsuits are going to end up in a courtroom. I think that Clemson and Florida State probably will end up in another conference because of their football pedigree. And I believe that the ACC will go back to the way it was when I first got here in 1999 and all those years previous, that, yeah, football is important, but this is a basketball league. And I think that's where their main focus will end up being. I don't know when that's going to happen, but I think ultimately Clemson and Florida State will end up moving on. And I think of the two, as much as Florida State's been more vocal, I think Clemson is more desirable for other conferences.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I'm fascinated when you say that because I wonder if I'm North Carolina, which is this. I keep hearing from SEC sources is the school that both Big Ten and SEC just covet.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if North Carolina can sit there and there's nobody in the room that goes, we just can't function like this. If we could go get that money here, I don't know how we justify staying. If we can get the money there, I don't know how we justify staying here. But
yeah, and there have been some kind of quiet rumblings, if there is such a thing, that maybe North Carolina is a player in this thing. Don't know that for sure, but look, as we have seen just in the last 4 or 5 years, you never discount anything. Everything is on the table right now. I think the only thing that's keeping this from being a full-fledged circus is the lack of a big top.
No, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I keep getting the feeling that it's a volcano, right? You drive by the volcano and you can't tell that the volcano is about to erupt, but it's about to erupt. And there's just too much money involved. And those are programs, North Carolina, Clemson, maybe NC State, Virginia. Those are programs that they're leaving money on the table, and there's probably somebody in the room on a daily basis that goes, we can't justify this. And so I agree with you. I think it ultimately happens. And when it starts, yeah, the circus music will crank up. It's pretty loud, I suspect. Well, hey, listen, thank you for the time. Have a safe trip down to Oxford. Hopefully you and I can say hello in person in Vaught-Hemingway on Saturday night.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Planning on getting there early Saturday because I keep hearing people telling me about this place called the Grove.
Yep.
that I need to check out. I've actually been on the Ole Miss campus. Did a baseball series there a few years ago, but this will obviously be a first time for football. So I'm looking forward to seeing all of the pageantry that goes along with it.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. If you go into the Grove, make sure you pack an extra shirt just in case. It might be a little warm and there might be some spillage, so you'll want to have an extra a little bit extra wardrobe with you just in case.
I'll wear a raincoat.
There you go. All right, Dan. Thank you. I'll see you on Saturday.
All right, Neil. Thank you.
Elliot Clough covers Iowa for Rivals.com. Kind enough to spend some time with us here on MPW Digital Extra, the college football season. Basically getting started here on Thursday. We're recording this a few days early, so if all hell breaks loose in some Big Ten storyline over the next few days, it's not Elliot's fault. It's not my fault. We didn't have a crystal ball in front of us. He's getting ready to go on a quick little last-minute vacation. I'm getting ahead on some stuff, so we're recording this before that hell broke loose. And if no hell broke loose, then ignore what I just said. We're going to talk some Big Ten. All right, Elliot, first of all, thanks for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely, Neil. Been following each other on Twitter for a little while, I think, and happy to connect a little bit.
Kind of a closet Hawkeye fan, so I follow you guys.
Right.
All right. So we've had some Big Ten related guests on MPW Digital over the last, I don't know, it feels like 80 years that we've been previewing this football season, and there's kind of a consensus, and I want to get your thoughts on how much you buy it because you're there covering the Hawkeyes daily. It's Ohio State's the class of the Big Ten. Oregon's probably second. And then there's not a great consensus on who's third. Some people say Penn State. Some people are starting to say Iowa. We'll start there. How much do you buy the Hawkeyes as a potential spoiler in finishing maybe third? And look, third this year probably gets you into a 12-team playoff, right?
Yeah, once you get past Ohio State, Oregon, like you mentioned, I think it's Penn State, Michigan. And of course, Michigan quarterback situation, all that turnover with the staff, Harbaugh leaving, things are different, right? But a lot of the bones are still there. I think a lot of people would agree. And, I think a lot of the talk in Iowa City right now or around the Hawkeyes is they could be third. They could. Or they could be eighth, right? I mean, there's that middle of the pack Big Ten where it's like USC and, forgive me, some of these other Pac-12 schools. I'd have to look at like Nebraska. Some people are throwing Nebraska in there. It's hard to even think of because there are so many teams in the Big Ten now, right?
It's a weird looking league, right? When you look at, I've got this, right. I've got this Big Ten schedule in front of me, courtesy of our friends at O'Neill Steel, the metals company, and you look at like Oregon at UCLA is a Big Ten game. It doesn't feel right yet. It's going to take a minute.
Right.
It's going to take a minute for Southern Cal at Washington to feel like a Big Ten game. Those are Pac-12 games, but now those are Big Ten.
Right.
And so I don't know, for whatever reason, and maybe this is just because I'm based in the Southeast and we're used to it now. We've been talking about Oklahoma and Texas for so long. Oklahoma and Texas in the SEC feels more normal to me than the West Coast teams in the Big Ten. And it probably, if I were covering a Big Ten school, it would feel the opposite. But from this perspective,
Sure.
It sort of seems that way.
Well, looking at the possibility for Iowa to finish in a position as, maybe third, maybe get into a Big Ten championship game, which is, again, way more difficult now than it was in the division era. But the likelihood of that, it's so up in the air right now. With the offense, what we saw at their open practice a couple weeks ago for their Kids Day open practice was awful from the ones. It was bad. Now, granted, they're facing top 5 defense in the country, right? Like, that has to be a factor. Luke Lachey, who's Cade's number 1 option, wasn't playing. They're missing 2 receivers. Like, there's a bunch of factors in there. Cade, of course, coming off the torn ACL, and now he's playing live football for the first time in almost a year. So there's a lot of things to factor in. But with Tim Lester bringing in this new offense, I think, well, myself included, a lot of people are saying, well, believe it when I see it, right? And you like, the defense is definitely worth being a top 3 team in the Big Ten, but Cade was bad in that Kids Day, and we're being told that he's more than likely going to be the starter. Yesterday, Kirk went to the podium and said, if we had a game tomorrow, Cade'd be the starter. He wouldn't, commit to that for next week. Brendan Sullivan very much in that competition as well. Man, going through Iowa's schedule with the way the ball just happened to fall last year. Iowa, I think a lot of people, especially in the Iowa fan base, think Iowa should have gone 11-1 with Deacon Hill as their starting quarterback. And then you go back and look at how everything fell, and they very easily could have gone 7-5.
Yeah.
Right? With the way things are right now, offensive line has improved. Like, much better. They're much more veteran. The run game looks solid, but you won't be able to run the ball if defenses are going to stack the box with 8 guys. So there's a lot of,
not to interrupt, but isn't there some addition by subtraction from getting rid of the ridiculous storyline? And I blame Ferentz for it. He let his son stay, and he let the point total thing become this thing, and all the kids have phones. Come on, we can do the BS about, well, they don't know that this is a storyline and it doesn't happen inside these walls, which is total horseshit. It absolutely does. And so you have that stuff piling up, and then once you have 2 or 3 bad offensive games, everybody knows he's dead man walking. That kind of becomes a thing, and then you have to announce that, yes, indeed, he's not coming back next season. So now he's a lame duck OC. All of that stuff kind of factors in, right? And so you get rid of all of that. It feels like there's a certain cleansing that just comes from that alone.
yes. And Tim Lester, I will tell you 100%, has been a breath of fresh air. Like, it's just a completely, in media availability and the limited availability that we get from coordinators, right? It's just a completely different air in the room. And I imagine that's been inside the building too.
Yeah, of course.
But how do you recover from how bad that was quickly, right? That's the question. Can you? Will you? The narrative that Lester wants to put out there, I don't know if narrative is the right word, but his goal that he put forth for the team and what he did at Syracuse as their offensive coordinator was, we want to, for whatever we ranked nationally last year, we want to cut that in half. So their goal is to be 65th in the country offensively. And based on what we've seen, 1, and 2, how bad it was last year, I don't know if that's going to happen. And, I've talked to a few folks behind the scenes, but from what I've been told, the X's and O's are there. But now you're dealing with the fallout of the Brian Ferentz era, in that, do you have the Jimmies and the Joes, right? How bad the X's and the O's were affected your ability to recruit really important positions, wide receiver, quarterback, and not so much tight end, not so much offensive line. There was some fallout, in that George Barnett era when they just really were losing guys because of injury and stuff like that. Now they're starting to shore the offensive line up. But, man, right now it's personnel. Right now it's personnel for the Iowa offense. And you know, I believe in Tim Lester. We'll see how things shake out for him for sure.
So Ohio State's the class of the Big Ten. Just how far ahead of everybody else are the Buckeyes?
Oh, man. You know, we're talking about Iowa being third, possibly in the Big Ten, and I think everybody's expecting Ohio State to blow them out. If that's telling, I mean, you could put that on Iowa's offense, sure, like we've been talking about here momentarily, but Ohio State, it's just at another level, right? Like last year, there was a recruit that kind of surfaced late. In the Florida area, and I always forget his name. I need to look at Rivals and my future cast quickly because I future casted him to Iowa because Iowa was the only Power 5 program involved, and then Ohio State pops in and he's gone. Leroy Roker was his name.
Okay.
And he was still a 3-star. He still is a 3-star recruit. He's a freshman now at Ohio State. But I didn't see that happening, one, because he was a 3-star and Iowa was his only offer. But that's just kind of what you expect. If Iowa is in a battle with a program like Ohio State, they're going to Ohio State because they get those 4 and 5 stars. And in Iowa, in this 25 class, they've only got 2 4-stars, and one of them's a legacy. And the other kid, his parents have been season ticket holders his whole life, right? So it's just the difference in talent that Ohio State has. Maybe not coaching, maybe not scheme, maybe not all these other things, but they just get the guys who are bigger, stronger, faster, right? And sometimes it just comes down to that in football.
All right, Penn State was a team that I saw. Ole Miss played Penn State in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl late December last year in Atlanta. Penn State was sort of impressive everywhere, except I thought they had a pretty average quarterback. And there's a lot of hype around Drew Aller, and he seems like a great kid. Nothing personal at all, but in terms of as a quarterback, I thought he was fine. But there was nothing about him that was like, oh, yeah, this is the guy that's going to take a team to a national quarterfinal. This is a team that's going to take a team to a national semifinal. Your thoughts on him a lot closer than they're in the Big Ten than I am here.
Yeah, you know, when Iowa went to Penn State last year, they throttled them, right? 31-0, 35, I think it was 31-0. And I think a lot of the production, you know, I didn't leave that game thinking, oh, Drew Aller, that was because of Drew Aller, right? I left that game thinking because Chop Robinson ate Mason Richmond alive, right? And granted, Mason Richmond was hurt a good contingent of last year, but also Chop Robinson was a first-round NFL draft pick for a reason. They're a good team. Do I think Drew Aller is going to win a Heisman in his candidacy, maybe even a Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year? I don't. I mean, I'm right there with you. He doesn't have the big arm. He's not, you know, super elusive. He's not a dual threat, really, type of quarterback. He's a game manager. And at a place like Penn State, you can win a lot of games as a game manager. So he was a very hyped recruit. I don't think part of it is also the offense. I think over this last year, they weren't really willing to open things up. And maybe is it Kotelnicki they just brought in from Kansas?
Yeah, and he was in Atlanta. He actually did a press availability. He wasn't calling the Peach Bowl because you're not going to come in and call the last game of the year and all that stuff. And
right.
There's no reason to. He was very, very impressive, like on the podium. Frankly, everybody at Penn State was impressive on the podium. It was one of the most impressive programs over a 4 or 5 day period that I've encountered. And they looked the part on the field, but I mean, Ole Miss kind of dominated them, and Robinson didn't play. And you know, we talked about that. It had some bowl game feel to it. Ole Miss dialed in, Penn State not as dialed in. You saw some of that, but it kind of leads me to this question about the Big Ten. I want to get your thoughts on it. There's a lot of discussion here in the SEC about how many bids are realistic. Kirby Smart said the other day he thought 3 was expected, 4 if things really fell. I know, and I've been the other way, And I don't really consider myself an SEC homer at all. I'm pretty critical. I sort of make fun of some of the stuff that the SEC says and does, but I think the SEC is going to get 4 and could get 5 if things fell correctly. What are your thoughts about the Big Ten? Where does, just from a number standpoint, what do you sort of forecast as you look ahead to the week of Christmas?
Right. That's something that we've talked about from an Iowa perspective quite a bit, because that's their goal, is to make the CFP this year.
Yeah.
Just bar none. And the issue there is that with the group of 5 auto qualification, you don't have to be a top 12 team. You might have to be a top 10 team, top 8 team in the country in Power 4 to get in. The way I see it, right now, looking at things, we have a whole lot of football to be played, but the only 2 programs in the Big Ten that I really would feel confident about making the playoff would be Ohio State and Oregon. I mean, there are scenarios where I could see Penn State, Michigan, and Iowa getting in, right? Not all 5. That would be, that in that case, you're leaving out Florida State. In that case, you're leaving out Clemson. And that, I mean, who knows how good they're going to be this year too. But, man, 5 SEC teams? Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Tennessee.
You'd be talking Alabama, Georgia, and then you have this mix of teams that all have chances to be sort of 2-loss teams. Ole Miss, LSU, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, if things fell right. Missouri has a pretty favorable schedule. I mean, Missouri could go 10-2 and look up and not really have a quality win on their schedule. I'm looking at Iowa's schedule here. I mean, I don't think it's completely unrealistic that they're 4-0 when they go to Ohio State, say they lose, but everybody loses to Ohio State. They could beat Washington, Michigan State, Northwestern, Wisconsin at home. UCLA is going to suck. Open date at Maryland, Nebraska at home. I mean, Maryland and Nebraska are good teams, but I don't know that anybody considers them world beaters. That would be, I mean, lose one of those, that's 10-2. I don't know that would be enough to get them in because they wouldn't really have the quality win, but you'd be a 10-2 Big Ten team, and one of your losses would have been at Ohio State where you could go, well, nobody beats them.
Right. The issue here is, so I grew up in Iowa. I've watched Iowa football my whole life, been on the beat the last 2 years. When watching a game against a program like Northwestern, we saw it last year in Wrigley. Iowa definitely the better team, but the offense was so bad that they won 10-7.
Yeah.
Right. And they stuffed Northwestern on the 1 in order to beat them. And that last second field goal is what won the game. I could see Iowa going out west because they've been awful out west and losing to UCLA on a short week. I could see Northwestern coming into Kinnick and stealing one. I could see Wisconsin avenging that loss last year. Maybe that air raid, they finally get it figured out. I don't know how that's going to work in the Big Ten. That had me skeptical last year when they started the year ranked 19th. I'm skeptical of their ranking to start this year too. But it's the possibility of seeing some of the, I could see a win. I mean, a lot of people are saying, 11-1's a possibility, but it's right back to what we started with, right? I could see 7-5. Things don't break right. But you mentioned 10-2. I don't think they get in with 10-2. I think they have to go at 11-1 to get in.
All right, last thing. Give me some Big Ten sleepers. Is it Nebraska? Is it Rutgers? I've heard some Rutgers talk. Are we underselling Southern Cal? Is Wisconsin going to be better than maybe they were a year ago? Give me if I told you somebody not named Iowa or Penn State or Michigan finished, say, third. Someone was a real surprise to finish third in the Big Ten. Where would you kind of target?
Man, well, if we're going sleeper, I don't know if I would put them at third, but if we're going sleeper, I'd probably say Nebraska this year. I believe in Matt Rule. I believe in what he's in, his track record. It's year 2, right? And they started off well last year before the train went off the tracks. And I mean, they probably should have beaten Iowa. It really didn't appear like either one of those teams wanted to win that game. But everything I've heard about Dylan Raiola is that he's legit. That's really what they were missing last year. Their quarterback play was awful. And Dylan Raiola appears to be legit. He was number 2 prospect in the country for us at Rivals in his recruiting class, in the 24 recruiting class, behind Jeremiah Smith, who went to Ohio State, of course. And of course, their defense was awesome last year, too. I don't think they lost a ton of personnel. They lost their starting left tackle, which is going to hurt, but I think that was going to be a competition for them. I think what the job that Matt Rule has done it's just his track record is what I believe in, and I think he can put it together. He's got the resources at Nebraska for sure, and getting a guy like Dylan Raiola is a massive win. So there, I wouldn't say I'm expecting a big year from Nebraska, but looking at that Iowa-Nebraska game as somebody who covers Iowa at this point makes me a little nervous. Like, I know we did our preview podcast like last week, our guys, myself, from the site called Hawkcast, and we previewed the entire season, and my other 2 guys that are with me on the podcast, Ross and Adam, both picked Nebraska to beat Iowa in that Black Friday game. I didn't, but I mean, Dylan Raiola at that point in the season is going to be a different Dylan Raiola than what we've got right now.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a certain sort of Nico Imaliva quality to him where you sort of expect him to really come on as the season goes on. I said one last thing. I started with an Iowa question. I'll finish with an Iowa question. Kirk Ferentz has been there forever, it seems like. I mean, he hasn't indicated anything publicly, at least what I've heard, that the end of his coaching career is near, but it stands to reason that he's closer to the end than he is the beginning. Do you get any sort of a sense as to how much longer he plans to be the head coach there?
Man, that's a tough call. Last year I said 3 to 5 years, and I'd probably say the same thing right now. We talked about it on our podcast, talking about his suspension, and who's to say he's sitting at home for this first game against Illinois State, and he's just like, "Oh, this sucks. I can't quit coaching for another 10 years," right? But you're exactly right. He hasn't, alluded to being done anytime soon. So I would probably still put it on 3 to 5 years, just based on his age more than anything, and the fact that he's been doing it so long. And additionally, I'm not saying I think things are going to go sideways by any means, but if things start to go sideways, like they did at the end of the Hayden Fry era, maybe the administration starts pushing, because they've got guys on the staff right now. Like Seth Wallace is going to be the head coach while KF is gone for this one game. He's the assistant head coach, linebackers coach, and assistant defensive coordinator. And they just keep giving him promotions to get him to stick around, because everybody wants him. He's a good coach. And I wouldn't say this assistant head coach makes him head coach in waiting by any means, but he's a young up and coming name, young relative to Kirk, right? But young up and coming name that could step in and I think lead the program in a really solid direction. Same thing for LeVar Woods, who's their special teams coordinator. So there are some names that people are excited about, and that I think that they believe they could lead the Hawkeyes in a positive direction.
Elliot, as always, thanks so much for the time. Hope your vacation goes well, and good luck this year covering the Hawkeyes. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Neil.
A big thank you to all of our guests today on MPW Digital, presented by Rustic Revivals. Thanks to David Eckert. Thanks to Braden Gall. Thanks to Dan Scott. And obviously thanks to Elliot Clough. Sorry, I was having a little mental lapse there. Thanks to all of them for their time on the show. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll have lots of coverage throughout the day today and into the weekend as Ole Miss gets the 2024 season started with a evening kickoff at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium against Furman. So until Saturday night, take care, enjoy your weekend, and we'll talk to you again soon.